The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Shepard Smith, Head of Marketing here at Gravitate, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. The topic of today's conversation is mega-personalization. And while we have quite a bit to discuss today, we welcome questions and invite you to submit them at any time using the written chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. Everyone in the audience is muted. We'll be sending all of you a link to a recording of this webinar afterwards. Claire, I'll now turn the presentation over to you.
Great, thanks, Shepard. Now we're going to dive right in here. We have a lot to cover. But first off, hello, and thank you all for joining today's webinar about mega personalization. This is, of course, not a technical term, but what we mean by mega is taking website personalization to the next level. And today we're going to show this to you in action on CFP Board's new website. So let's start with quick introductions for the teams that brought this new website to life, starting with Dave Mazzola.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dave Mazzola, Director of IT at CFP Board.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Williams, and I am the Director of Business Solutions at Gravitate Solutions. We were the primary NetForum and integration vendor between CFP Board's AMS of record, NetForum Enterprise, and the website that you'll see in the presentation today.
I'm Mark Davenport, Lead Strategist with Interactive Strategies. We were the website design and development vendor.
And I am Claire Gango-Padai, Senior Digital Strategist, also with Interactive Strategies. So before we dive in, here's just a rundown of our agenda. We're first going to walk you through the different types of personalization and the benefits of each, just so you can start thinking about what kind of personalization is right for my organization and my website users. Then we'll present a case study of the newly redesigned CFP Board website, so you can see both a personalized and an individualized experience in action, because this website offers both. We'll then walk through the personalization process with a focus on some key considerations to set you up for success. So from here, I'll hand it over to my colleague Mark.
Thanks, Claire. So these days, we all want to use our time effectively, particularly when we visit websites with a particular need or task to complete. If you could move to the next slide, Claire. The challenge for organizations is how to prioritize information and options when the audience needs vary considerably. Personalization allows us to provide visitors with clear pathways to match their needs. For example, members would want quick task completion. For prospects, they want to understand and be enthused about the thing that you're trying to get them to do before they transact. And then the general public may just want to know what this is all about. So giving users what they want also helps your organization to reach its goals. We can retain our members with individualized experiences. Oh, we can go back.
Sorry.
We can convert them with highly relevant benefits for prospects. And for the public, we can build our brand by keeping things simple explanations simple. Surveys show that a majority of association members want content to be personalized to them, yet only a quarter of association executives say that they're doing it well. So there's clearly a gap to fill. Looking on the business side, a Salesforce.com survey shows that a majority of business buyers expect vendors to personalize engagements to their needs. More than half of consumers are willing to give personal data in exchange for personalized offers. And 84% of customers say they would prefer to be treated like a person rather than a number. No surprise there. So, what is personalization? It can be helpful to think of it with a few distinctions here. So when we use the word customize, it would be something like a My Yahoo, where you can pick, move modules around a page, pick what stocks you want to show up on the top there. This is where the user himself states a preference. For associations and businesses, this can take the form of email preferences that you might let them choose which emails they get on their own without having to call somebody up. When we talk about personalization, which is more of the focus today, this is when the system learns about the behaviors or a group and makes the content specific to them. And then we'll talk about individualization, where the system knows exactly who you are and is providing specific information for and about you. We can think about a variety of different characteristics upon which we might base personalization, where needs might vary. Certainly geolocation is an obvious one. If a user is in Chicago, you show them the local chapter or the local pizza restaurant or apartments for rent or whatever it is that is based on their location. We can also think of it in terms of desktop or mobile. A mobile user for your situation may have distinct, maybe they're coming for a specific transaction on their phones more than if they're on the desktop. We can also look at what they do when they get to our website. So what types of topics are they reading about based on the pages they see? Did they type words into the search box? We can create customization rules based on that. And then of course there's explicit personalization, which is we know who you are because you've logged in. We know it's time to renew. We know all sorts of things about you, what career stage you're in. And this is, a large part of the topic today is explicit personalization.
And
so
from here, we'll
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
I was going to turn it over to Dave to talk more about CFP Board.
Okay, great. So CFP Board is a credentialing body. We certify financial professionals so that the public has access to competent and ethical financial planning. So we're not a membership organization per se, but a lot of the same concepts apply. We're interested in prospect acquisition, we're interested in candidate conversion, and we're interested in renewal engagement of our CFP professionals once they're certified. So next slide, Claire. So our old website, we faced a lot of challenges with our old website. At its core, it really wasn't a great user experience, to put it bluntly. It was dense, content was hard to find. Also, it was organization-centric rather than user-centric. So we heard often that users had trouble finding what it is they were trying to do. And finally, it reflected an organizational attitude emphasizing the difficulty of obtaining certification. So we had to address all that. Claire, so our next slide. To address these issues, we did a number of things. We consolidated 2 existing sites and reframed the new site to serve those 3 primary audiences: prospects, candidates, and CFP professionals. We shifted the narrative from certification is very difficult to emphasize the value and the benefits of being certified. And our goal was to immediately engage these primary audiences when they logged into the site to make it easier for them to accomplish what they needed to do and what we wanted them to do. Meanwhile, we grouped our tertiary content so that it was well organized that other users could find what they needed. So with that, I'll hand it back off to Claire.
Thanks, Dave. So here you're seeing the new CFP Board homepage. Now, from a user's perspective, whether you're a prospect who may be interested in getting certified, a candidate actively going through the certification process, or a current CFP professional who is just keeping their certification up to date, no matter who you are, it's very important that the site supports you at every step of your journey. So right off the bat here, we're demonstrating that audience focus by showing real CFP professionals who have made it through the process and can really speak to the value of the certification. And in this view of the homepage, we don't yet know anything about our site visitor because they either haven't created an account or haven't logged in. So there is no personalized or individualized experience happening here yet. We're serving up content that's of broad interest to anyone coming to the site. But as soon as you create an account or log in, you're going to see a very different homepage with messages tailored to you and your interests. So on the far left here, this is that general homepage we were just looking at where we don't have any member data to leverage yet. But the middle screen shows the homepage of a current CFP professional who's logged in. We know their certification is up to date. So they're getting a message about downloading the new digital certificate along with some account details. Then we have on the right, this is the homepage for a candidate who's on the way to becoming certified. And this particular candidate is early in the process. So we're still showing them messaging about the value of the certification as a motivator. Now here's a quick demo of that homepage personalization in action. So I start out here on the general homepage, and then I'm going to log into my account to see my dashboard. And here this dashboard has my full profile info and a progress tracker. But let's say I want to come back to the homepage. When I click on this logo here to get back to home, I'm going to see unique content tailored to me. And this homepage content has a mix of personalization and individualization. So the tracker content on the top right, that's individualized. That's specific to me and to my journey. So I can see exactly where I am in the process. But the high-level messages and the news features kind of around the tracker, those represent personalization. I'm seeing this particular content because I'm in that group of early funnel candidates who have just begun. And depending on what steps I've completed and how close I am to certification, I'm going to see different messages and action items here. Now back here in the account dashboard, this is where you're going to see that even finer grain level of individualization, so content specific to you. And we worked with CFP Board and Gravitate upfront to create 9 different candidate personas or groupings. And each of these personas map to where a candidate is in the certification process. And Dave can speak to this a little bit more.
Yes, thanks, Claire. It's true, we were careful here to frame our personalization based upon user status, in this case from candidate status, to present clear guidance on their next steps. We wanted to provide calls to action that were very focused, depending on where they were in their journey, so that they had a very clear idea of what their next step was.
And here's another quick demo. So as a candidate, I can take an action in my dashboard, like telling CFP Board that I have a bachelor's degree with these check boxes. And this is going to immediately update my progress bar. So instantly, this candidate, which is me in this case, I'm seeing that I've made progress and I'm getting closer to becoming certified. And in some cases, I might take an action here and see new calls to action appear or links to helpful resources, in addition to those sort of progress updates in my tracker bar. So how are we doing all of this? This dashboard and the full site is built in the Sitecore content management system. And Sitecore is pulling information about me from CFP Board's AMS, which is NetForum. So that stores all of their member data. And we're not just pulling data into Sitecore. When I take an action on the dashboard, like confirming, like I just did, that I have a degree, that information is going to get sent back to the AMS to keep my member profile up to date. So it's really a two-way conversation between the CMS and the AMS, all made possible through APIs. And we do this both for candidates and for current CFP professionals. The CFP pros have a unique dashboard of their own because their needs are different and their journey is different. Now that data piece is, of course, really critical to making this kind of functionality happen, but the content is what makes it shine. So it's important to consider what kind of content your audiences are interested in and what their mindset is when they're on your website. Now, like Dave mentioned, overall, CFP Board has really evolved the tonality of the site from the message of this process is going to be really hard to you can do this. And we weave this supportive messaging into our personalization. For example, candidates who are earlier in the process, we're going to show them much more of that you can do this messaging compared to a candidate who's very close to being certified because they just want to know their next step. We made these decisions based on audience research, determining what messages resonated most with candidates at different stages of the process. And an important point here is we're not telling it, we're saying are resources and tools that will help you. So mentorship, a candidate forum, practice exams, guides, a lot of different kinds of tools. So we're backing up that motivational messaging with real content that adds value at different points in the process. And Dave can talk a little bit about that kind of content on the CFP side.
Yes, exactly. Thanks, Claire. The key for us here was substance. We had data on what resources were actually helpful to candidates and to CFP professionals on their journeys, and we put those front and center. We didn't guess, we used the data and we put those resources up front.
So we've seen a couple examples of the site, but let's talk a little bit about how we got to this point. So the personalization process from customization to individualization, it's very similar to the process of a website redesign. And we like to use this metaphor of a pencil to describe it because personalization is ultimately a tool. It's something that's going to allow you to communicate with your audiences and to maximize the impact of your work. And we start the personalization process with discovery. And here we answer the question, what will we personalize? Now, to get there, we needed to learn about CFP Board's needs and goals from an organizational standpoint. We also talked a lot about their audience's needs and goals and research to get there. And we have to learn about what data is available and how it's structured, because here we're starting to think about how can we leverage that data in the new site. From there, we move into planning, which is all about how will we personalize. Here we define the new user experience, which includes some content planning, and determine what's needed from a technical perspective to create this new experience. So are there any new data points we need to capture, for example? And Jeff from Gravitate is going to speak to this more shortly. But once we document that how, then we move into build, which is where we implement the personalization rules into the CMS and create the API to let the AMS and the CMS communicate. This phase also includes some content entry, testing, and QA once development is complete. And from there, we launch. So in CFP's case, this was a full website redesign, which included the personalization piece. Now, that's the process in a nutshell. But from here, we've pulled out a few key recommendations and considerations to share with you, things to keep in mind as you go through a personalization process. So here I'll hand it over to Jeff.
Thank you, Claire. Appreciate that. So the information, the first thing we want to talk about would be how important the data is to the overall process and how to think about it. As you can see here, data is the core key to personalization in your CMS. And the important thing here is that NetForum, as their AMS, is the system of record for all data in the system. So the importance of knowing your data and how you actually want to use it is something you need to think about early in the process. So one of the main discussion points that we had as a group, all three parties together, was to decide what is the best way to collect data from CFP's constituents, depending on which member journey they're going through. How is the best way to store that data? And then how is that data going to be leveraged or used moving forward? As Claire mentioned, there's a two-way integration between the two platforms. So we know that data has to come in from both the CMS and also potentially through NetForum's own external facing web portal, eWeb, which CFP also has integrated into this whole overall ecosystem. How that data gets stored in NetForum so that then other API layers can then take that data and leverage it in the CMS with some of the personalization and individualization that Claire and Mark have talked about earlier in the presentation. Learning and discussing and figuring out ways where the data is collected and how it is going to be displayed and stored and used in the future are really key decision points that need to be made early in the process. One other thing just to keep in mind is as you go through this process, clean data is important. So as you sometimes you'd hear people say, bad data in, bad data out. So when we go through these processes, and this is something that the CFP team does a wonderful job of, and we engaged in at the beginning of this process, is as we know we're going to be collecting this new data that's going to be collected through both the CMS and through the eWeb platform in NetForum, we want to make sure that the data that we already have in the system is as clean as possible. So we went through some mechanisms to help review that data, make sure that it was still necessary for this process, made adjustments as necessary, and then use that in the overall design of the platform moving forward.
And on to a little bit about the CMS. So the personalized experience that you're seeing on the site, that's all set up through the Sitecore CMS. And here we're seeing the back end where a content editor can log in and directly edit personalization rules and set up new rules. And that's all without code changes or deployments involved. So here I can say, I want to display this different content based on what I know about this group of users. And as associations, you have all of this data available to you in your AMS, but you need to make sure you have a CMS platform that's going to allow you to put that data to use. Now, that doesn't have to be Sitecore. Sitecore has a robust personalization engine built in, but there are other CMSs that will allow you to do this. You'll just want to work with your digital partner to find the right tool for the job because there are many options there. And it's also important to consider early on your larger digital ecosystem. So CFP Board, for example, their space goes beyond just Sitecore and NetForum, even though those were the two core pieces. There's a candidate forum that lives in Higher Logic, a job board through Magix, and digital certificates through Credible. So in addition to building an API to get Sitecore and NetForum talking, we also implemented SSO or single sign-on for a variety of systems. And this really allows your visitors to seamlessly transition across platforms without being prompted to sign in again and again or sign out. And Jeff can speak to this even more.
Sure. I think one of the things we wanted to accomplish through this is to utilize best-of-breed third-party platforms to achieve the goals that they are trying to meet for CFP and for their certificants and people going through the user journeys. So instead of trying to reinvent everything inside of NetForum or inside of Sitecore, we're going to leverage these other tools that already exist out in the marketplace in order to provide that functionality to CFP's users. So as you go through and you look at Credible for the certification display and tracking, you look at Higher Logic for communities and collaboration tools, and Magix for job boards information. By providing single sign-on through Sitecore, which was the system of record for authentication, for logging into the system, everyone had the same user experience in logging into Sitecore. And when they're going from the CFP main website to these other third-party platforms, they were able to get there, as Claire said, seamlessly without having to log in again, and with the new systems that they were reaching, having the ability to see all the attributes that had been stored. So for example, back on the demo that Claire was giving earlier, when she went in and checked the box that said she had completed her bachelor's degree, by doing that in the Sitecore side, that data was stored in NetForum and therefore able to be passed along to these other platforms as needed when the user reaches those platforms through browsing.
Now, for all of those different systems to talk to each other, all of the teams managing those systems also need to talk to each other. We could not have accomplished what we did without a lot of conversations and a lot of planning. And I think Dave can speak to this firsthand.
Definitely, thanks, Claire. Yeah, we had a lot of meetings. We had standing weekly meetings with Gravitate. We had standing weekly meetings with Interactive, and we had standing weekly meetings with all partners together. This was a huge time commitment, but it was essential for us to be successful in this project. There were a lot of moving pieces here. We also communicated with business partners at key steps throughout the process to inform them and asked for feedback to make sure there were no surprises. And finally, communication pieces, we formed a steering committee that had central authority for decision-making and communication to the organization at large.
And particularly thinking about those technical conversations between our three teams, the key output of those were really detailed documentation of all the website requirements. So that's from the APIs to the website functionality to personalization logic. And the dashboards are the most technically complex piece of this website. So not surprisingly, they also took the most time to plan and document than anything else in the site. And we use a tool called Confluence to document requirements. And all of our three teams had access to review, to comment on those requirements until they were ultimately approved by Dave and the CFP board team. And I can't stress enough how critical requirements are for any project, but especially those that are technically complex and take more than a few months, they're key. Just thinking about as these features were being tested in, let's say, November or December of last year, a question could come up that required us to go back to notes from 6 months prior. And requirements are really what allow you to keep those conversations documented. So you're not just going off of memory about why a certain decision was made along the way. And I know Dave and Jeff were very involved in this process and can speak to it as well.
Definitely, Claire. I would echo Claire there. As these dashboards evolved, they were very complex, and we found it necessary to reference previous notes and previous versions of the requirements. So I encourage you to keep your technical documentation up to date, and I encourage you to take notes on the planning meetings and the requirements meetings that you have, so that you can refer back to those discussions.
And from the
Jeff?
technicals, yep, and from the technical side, thanks, Dave. One of the things we tried to emphasize in our engagement was to actually document all the solutions from an API layer that we enabled for the project. So that not only provided both Interactive Strategies development team and CFP's team clear view and scope understanding of what we were attempting to accomplish based on what the requirements were, but they are now also future documents for CFP's team to take and move forward with in case they want to make changes, or in case, 3 months down the road, they have a shift in how they want to handle their business in a certain area. Well, they have full documentation as to what the current API endpoints are doing, and if they need to make adjustments, they will be able to start with what their current configuration is, and then make those adjustments as needed, depending on which parties need to be involved.
Yeah, that's right. And as the website evolves after launch, it is important to keep going back to those requirements and update them. Make sure you always have that source of truth. Now, from the beginning of the project, it really helps if you can nail down your project priorities and particularly your must-haves for launch. So what's critical to success and what can wait? So the recommendation here is to embrace this idea of a phase 2 as a possibility. So new ideas or feature requests are going to come out throughout the project, from the beginning through requirements and through testing. But it's important to always ask and keep perspective around, is this something we need to prioritize for launch, or should we turn our attention elsewhere? So does the value add of this particular feature outweigh any timeline implications? So we had a running list of things that maybe we were nice to haves that we want to revisit right after launch. And 2 more tips to go here. So here it's plan ahead for content needs. Content creation and content entry are very common culprits for delaying website or feature launches. It's so easy to underestimate how much time is needed to write new content, review it, approve it, and then get it all entered into your CMS. So as early as you can, start thinking about content. You're going to want to consider, who's going to be involved in content creation, what kind of training might be needed, and if it's your internal staff doing a lot of that content creation, what can you do to make that work a priority for them by clearing out other tasks on their plate? And similarly, who's going to be involved in content entry? And are those people available during the scheduled time frame for that work? You want to make sure you have a full schedule for the project so you can look ahead and plan for that. And here, this is a snapshot of the high-level plan, which then evolved into a detailed day-to-day schedule. And Dave can speak more to how this was used.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, I would make 2 points here. As this chart lays out or indicates, it's important to partner with your business units early and get this work on their calendars so that it's on their radar. Secondly, it's important to establish editorial rules so that you've got clear guidance on establishing that central voice so that you don't have dozens of writers on your site. One note I'll make about the content in this engagement, it's another way to build consensus throughout the organization on the final product.
And this here, you're seeing a Trello board. There are many other tools like this, but this is what we use to document bugs and change requests as the site was tested and continues to evolve. So testing is a huge piece to consider, especially when it comes to an individualized or personalized website experience. For individualization in particular, you have to think about how many scenarios are you going to test? The thousands of possible variations of the candidate journey, or the 100 or 200 scenarios that might account for 80 or 90% of cases. You'll also want to think about who is doing that testing. So Dave and CFP Board had a number of data analysts involved who were very familiar both with the AMS side and the website requirements. So that made for a very efficient process, and they were available throughout. But depending on how thoroughly you want to test and how many resources are available, these things are all going to influence your testing timeline. And Dave, maybe you could speak a little bit to your team's experience here.
Sure, thanks, Claire. A few points to make here. Develop your test plans early and engage your business partners so they know what's coming and so that they have a voice in the test plans. You want to focus on your core use cases first before you worry about your tertiary use cases. What are those 90% of users going to see before you worry about the 10%? And finally, we also tested major functionality, key features with API calls like search functions early so that we could work out any kinks on those well in advance of launch. So that wraps up our 6 tips. So what are the results? We made this investment, CFP Board did. Is it working? Let's take a look at some of our results. So since the launch, we're seeing a lot of positive outcomes here, as you can see on these charts. Candidate engagement with the steps of the process are up, and the resources, use of the resources rather is up, and we're tracking conversion rates. Prospect acquisition is up, site traffic is up. Kind of across the board, we're seeing very positive indicators here. Similarly, here's on this slide, call volume is down in some of the key areas. We're hoping to reduce traffic to our call center by better explanation of the steps along the process, and we're seeing that reflected as well. So all very, very positive early indicators 9 months in. All of that said, a website isn't really done, is never really done, and we're continually tracking. We're looking at analytics, and we're continually reassessing and deciding if and when we need to make additional tweaks, to course corrections as we go. I'll close this out here by saying there are 2 overarching success factors to this project, which CFP Board does consider to be a success. The first was executive sponsorship. We had clear leadership from our executive team throughout this project, which helped to set priorities throughout the organization. And we chose good partners. Both Interactive Strategies and Gravitate Solutions worked well together. They worked with CFP Board well, and they were fun to work with. And the end product kind of speaks for itself. So with that, I'd say I think we're shifting to a Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And I'll just chime in again on your comment about a website never being done. Of course, it's come a long way, but we still have regular reviews of analytics, and we're already seeing ways through looking at the site search, what are different candidates and pros searching for. Those boil up to the top different keywords that we can then think about. Maybe we can create new personalization rules around this. So if, around exam time, candidates are very interested in this particular document, maybe we update personalization for that particular group around that time. So you can continue to learn and evolve because your audience evolves, so the website needs to mirror that as well. But yeah, that is it. We can open the floor up for any questions. Like Shepard mentioned at the beginning, you can add questions directly through the chat on the right. You're also more than welcome to reach out to any of us directly after the webinar. Now, one question we do have here already. So what was the timeline for launch? So project kickoff was October of 2018, and we launched in January 2020. So that was a 16-month project. And during our presentation, we talked a bit about the technical conversations between our 3 teams. I believe those started in April or May. So that's maybe 10 months of weekly meetings, and even more than that for Dave because he was having these meetings with both of our teams. So a lot of communication throughout the process.
That was biting off the entire personalization as part of a new website. Personalization can be done in smaller steps. If you have a CMS like Sitecore that has the capabilities built in, you could create new rules, with just a little bit of planning. Really, within a week, you could have a rule up on the site. If you need new data coming in from the AMS, you could create an endpoint and have that done in a month or 2. So there's smaller steps that you can take to incrementally improve your site's personalization. The dashboards themselves were very complex. It took months and months of requirements and so forth. That's a bigger undertaking than personalization of content blocks.
And I think that's something Dave would probably agree as well, and maybe Jeff as well, that we probably could have even started that process even earlier, diving into the data and starting in on requirements for the dashboard.
I would agree completely. And yes, the earlier start you get on those complex dashboard type projects, the better. I also agree with Mark. there are much smaller approaches or much more measured approaches you can take to this that don't require a 16-month timeline.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd say one thing that from our perspective that we felt was really successful for the project was that early discussion about data and how major pieces of functionality that CFP needed to expose and have their constituents interact with were handled. So for example, in that demo where Claire showed the user on the dashboard being able to select personalized checkboxes and let the system know certain pieces of information, maybe demographic information about themselves, we decided because we wanted that immediate interactivity that information should actually be collected in the CMS platform directly as opposed to somewhere inside of the AMS or in eWeb, where traditionally that data might be collected through a normal NetForum instance. But then things like transactions, like purchasing the exams and going through maybe some financial things, all are still being handled through the eWeb side. And in our perspective as well, what we haven't even talked about today was the fact that we actually rebranded the entire eWeb site at the same time with the lovely new look and feel that was designed through interactive strategies. So we took the design that IS came up with and that CFP obviously worked in conjunction with them on, and then we were able to skin a brand new version of the eWeb site for CFP, which allowed obviously the look and feel to be very seamless, as well as providing some new functionality that CFP didn't have at the time, while also maintaining existing functionality that was very vital to CFP's business practices. And Dave's team was very involved in that as well.
That's a great point. It was a really big discussion deciding, where does the user experience on Sitecore end and where do we pick back up on NetForum? So there were a lot of conversations there about, what kind of actions happen on either side there.
Yeah, and the nice thing about the design is that seamless handoff was very clear to the end user. And it sounds like Dave might have been about to say the same thing. Go ahead, Dave.
That, and also, yeah, we settled on a nice rule of anything transactional. We largely put in NetForum, and we shifted a lot of the other features to Sitecore, which, from a user experience perspective, is more robust. So we left transactions and all the meat in NetForum and all the display stuff in Sitecore, and that model worked really well for us.
Yeah, I think one thing that another decision we made that was really a positive one was moving all the search capability to Sitecore. There were some wonderful tools, and that's another one of those, use the best of breed to make a solution. While NetForum does have some search capability built into its base eWeb product, the Sitecore tool was by far and away a much better mechanism for not only the search capability and the UX, but then the display of the results and then taking calls to action based on the results that have come back from those searches. So from our perspective, our job on the Gravitate side was just to create the API layers and endpoints so that when the Sitecore site had a question to ask, we were able to answer it and provide the data back to be displayed through the CMS. And we did that I think there was a number of instances of that type of application throughout the platform in a number of different areas.
Here is a question for Dave that's come in. It says, what is your favorite feature or new tool on the site?
Favorite feature, that would be the candidate dashboard. We focus a lot of energy on candidate engagement, prospect acquisition, and candidate conversion. And we had a lot of things that we wanted to try and put into place that we suspected about these resources, and we knew about these resources and tools. So we were really excited to put those into action and to really make the candidate's journey much simpler, because one of the biggest complaints we had with our old site was candidates would come to our site and they wouldn't know what to do next, and they'd page upon page of content. So we're quite proud of the candidate dashboard, the pro dashboard too, but the candidate dashboard was much more complex and fun to see come to life.
Yeah, and the certification. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Well, one of the key strategic needs that we learned from CFP Board at the start of the project was this gap where candidate really didn't need to raise their hand and say, hi, I'm a candidate, until they were signing up for the exam. So they could be in the process of taking courses for, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, and you all wouldn't have it. They might drop out of the process entirely without ever having said hello to you. So the dashboard is really designed to get them engaged and provide like touch points to keep them moving. And if you notice that they've stalled in the process, there's other ways that you can get in touch with the people and kind of give them like, hey, how's it going? Here's some resources.
Mm-hmm.
And from talking to candidates.
Sorry, Claire.
I was just going to say, also early on in the process, we talked to a lot of candidates and did a survey, and we did find that there was some confusion around the process. So there were a lot of questions about, what's my next step, or can you explain the process from a high level? So the dashboard really helps with that from the user's perspective, because I think we've talked about a few times in this presentation that one of the key pieces is we are always showing them the exact next step to get toward the certification. So it's very clear. You don't have to read through paragraphs. It's really, if you could do one thing right now, it should be this.
Another question is, sorry if I missed it, but what has been the reaction from the customer/user side so far? Higher engagement? Any complaints?
Thanks, that's a good question. We have seen higher engagement, higher use of the site. We're tracking analytics throughout the site in terms of use of the dashboards, uses of the resources, access to content that was previously somewhat buried. So all of those are positive indicators. And response in general has been very positive to the site as well. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback in terms of the layout, the design, the beautiful design, access to content, ease of finding content. So overall, of course, you're always going to have some negative feedback, but very largely, overwhelmingly, we've been getting positive feedback on the site.
Another question is, how has the new site helped you stand out or compete?
It's a good question. In terms of within our space, what we try to do, what we are trying to do with the site is to establish our message, establish the brand of CFP Board. What is CFP Board about? What are we trying to accomplish? And encourage encourage prospects to get engaged with the organization, and encourage candidates to complete their certification, and encourage our CFP professionals to stay engaged with us. So, we really approach this as, how do we establish our message? How do we get our message out there and make sure that we're clearly representing what CFP Board is all about?
Mm-hmm. And that general personalization on the homepage really goes to that. If you remember earlier in the presentation, that the old homepage had probably 19 different things you could choose from to do. The new one has like 4, and they're all personalized. So if you come in, you're anonymous. It's about, what is CFP certification? Why is it valuable? Broad types of things. Once you identify yourself, it hones in on, okay, your potential donor. Well, here's some, information about the foundation and things like that. Your prospect. It sorts out. The signal to noise ratio gets a lot better.
For the website, we also created a lot of new content for those early prospects who may be just getting interested in getting a certification. So there is a lot of information around, what does the certification mean? How is it different from other certifications? And what does, this job, this role look like? And we do that with, stories from current CFP professionals. So, someone who might be changing their career into financial planning can get a real idea of what that career path is going to look like for them.
And perhaps a final question. I think we're right up against our time. It's a specific one. It says 16 months for everything you did is quite good. And there's a list of the steps: SSO implementation, changing CMS, etc. The question is, did you have a mirrored site at any point in time during development? By that, they mean the existing site needing to be maintained while rolling out new developed site, or was this developed and rolled out in phases?
We did a cutover. We maintained we basically went all in, all chips on the table, and rolled out the site. Of course, we maintained our historical site, as an archive and as a reference. But so in that sense, the old site is still there. But from a release perspective, we made the move at midnight on January 30th or whatever the night was. So
yeah, the good news and the perspective from the NetForum side is that on the eWeb side, we actually generated brand new eWeb sites that were completely separate from the existing sites. So we had full control and flexibility over when we decided to make those sites the default or main sites that were exposed to the general public externally. So we had no issues there on that transition. And then the API endpoints that were designed for the project were unique to the Sitecore integration for CFP. And so there was no danger in those being leveraged in other manners. And I believe on the Sitecore side, Claire or Mark can chime in as to how that transition went on your end.
Yeah, we had a fully functioning website up on servers that were hidden to the public until the moment that the DNS was pointed to them.
Yep.
Great. Well, I know we are at time here. I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us. We love this opportunity to kind of show off the new CFP website to everyone.
I agree. Thank you, everyone.
And if we weren't able to get to your question, we can follow up with you after the webinar. I think there might also be a recording that can be distributed. All right, thank you. Have a good
Thanks,
afternoon,
everyone.
everyone.
Take care.
All right.